Welcome back. We're gonna now look into DeFi services. So what are the different DeFi services? How are they built up within each other? And how is really the DeFi money Lego working? Let's dive into it. So if you look at various DeFi maps in the practitioners community, you can find that there are beautiful maps laid out of different assets and platforms or applications, if you will. That's similar to the stacks that we have looked at earlier, but today in this particular segment of the lecture, we're gonna look into a few of them. Also, I want you to be a bit kind of critical of. Not all of these are necessarily full DeFi or fully decentralized DeFi. Some are more decentralized than others. So always keep a critical mind about what is decentralization and what is really DeFi. The reason I'm saying this is because, for instance, if you look at DeFi analytics, so we have looked at, here's CoinGecko. That's a website that tells you about pricings. CoinMarketCap is as well a website that tells you about pricings. By the way, it's owned by Binance, so you also need to know that there are certain kind of interests at play, right? If the owner of a certain platform is at the same time an exchange and maybe supporting a variety of tokens, so you will see that a lot of VCs are also supporting some of the projects and then obviously advertising those. So all these kind of interests. It's not always that simple to dissect, but it's really important for you to understand the entire space. Infura, in particular, is an infrastructure provider that is tightly intertwined with MetaMask. So Infura is, for instance, the backend, if you will, of MetaMask, providing MetaMask all the data about the latest blockchain blocks, transactions, and so on. And if you're not running your own node and you're just using MetaMask, you are relying on Infura, which is a very heavily centralized component in the DeFi architecture. So these are just like things that I want you to be aware of and to look into, to critically assess, right? Whether it's decentralized or not, or to what degree it's decentralized, or maybe a single point of failure as well. So let's look into the DeFi building blocks and services, and in particular in asset tokenization. So in asset tokenization, tokenization is the process of adding a new asset to a blockchain. So you could create today an Imperial coin, right? If you want to, Imperial College London coin. So it's rather simple. You can just abide by the ERC20 standard that many people do. And then if you do so, people will know how to transfer, how to receive the assets, and so on. So the token is really like a representation of an asset on a blockchain. So you can make the asset more accessible, easy to transfer, and programmable if you abide by the token standards that I just mentioned. Obviously, there are or a variety of token standards. ERC20 tokens can also be a governance token, so you can have fungible governance tokens, you can have security tokens, you can have NFTs, so non-fungible tokens, or stablecoins. So NFTs are a particularly interesting adventure, I'd say, that started here, as you see, in the beginning of 2021 to rise in weekly trade volume by category. There's been even here this giant NFT that's kind of like an accumulation of many different artworks that was sold for $69 million US. CryptoKitties was probably one of the earliest NFTs in the fall 2017 that was also quite active. This was actually came about just before my first blockchain lecture at Imperial. So I gave a first blockchain lecture at Imperial in 2018. So students back then, they implemented their own CryptoKitty application, non-fungible tokens at the time. And stablecoins is another very, very intriguing and highly influential asset class. So by the name stable, I wouldn't always say that's stable. We looked at this in the next slide, but it's typically an off-chain. You have typically an off-chain collateral provider. So this is actually the case for the most successful ones like USDT and USDC. Then you might also have on-chain collateral like MakerDAO. You might have algorithmic stablecoins. These are super interesting because you often have no collateral. So there's some kind of an algorithm that tries to maintain a certain degree of stability, whatever stable means. And speaking of stability, or rather instability, so here we are plotting the price evolution of a variety of 5 different so-called stablecoins, and you can see USDT and USDC here are rather stable, right? If you look at the y-axis here, this is the price difference or the variation that you can get a feeling of. DAI here, this is a stable coin that's maintained with an on-chain collateral. Then you do have Ample, which is quite an interesting stablecoin that we will be looking into in the stablecoin lecture. And you do have ESD, for instance, that seemed here at least to go quite below the peg of $1 at the time. So you can see here the wider we look at the stablecoin styles, the more volatile they actually become. So it's quite unclear how people define stable in the word stablecoin itself. I guess it's a you can call it an aim to be less volatile than the average cryptocurrency coin. But yeah, I think the literature is probably still missing as far as I'm aware, the literature is still missing a clean definition. Maybe there is. So please let me know if you find any. So second, the building block for DeFi are decentralized exchanges. So similar to the traditional finance domain, exchanges are really the pivotal point where people can come and go to buy and sell an asset. And if we call decentralized exchanges DEXs and centralized exchanges SEXs, then you have here centralized exchanges and decentralized exchanges. And naturally, centralized exchanges have to be custodial, so they are basically similar to banks or brokers. They can be hacked. That happened to Mt. Gox and many other different blockchain exchanges before. They can be rogue, so they can just go offline and run away with the funds. That may have happened also before. They're not always very transparent. It's not always clear whether they are solvent at all. So there are a variety of questions around centralized exchanges, just like in the regular stock market. However, in the traditional finance, DeFi, these exchanges are typically highly regulated. Therefore, at least I'm not aware of many mishaps in recent times. And this is where decentralized exchanges come into play. They aim to be non-custodial and transparent, so they really want to kind of be the most secure exchange if possible, ideally with the best available liquidity and pricing information. So if we look at how DEXs or centralized exchanges operate, so in a centralized exchange you often have an order book, or it's also called a limit order book, right? You have a list of bid and a list of asks, and these somehow can then fit together, right? You have here the bids, here you have the asks, and at the place where they match, so let's say here is where they match, they are the closest to each other, right? And depending on the difference here, you have a spread, right? The further away they are from each other, you have a certain spread here between the pricing information. And DEXs operate fundamentally different. So we will look into this quite in detail in the DEX lecture, but one of the most famous or most popular DEXs are so-called automated market maker. And Bancor here was the very first to implement this and propose this function. They actually built a constant formula automated market maker, or CFMM, or we probably will refer to rather as AMM because it's shorter. And there are also different types of variations. So Balancer supports multiple assets. Curve has a particular high efficiency on stablecoin pools as well as non-peg assets now. And there's Uniswap as well, which gathered a lot of momentum after Bancor. So if you look at the trading volume of Uniswap versus Coinbase. Coinbase is a highly known centralized exchange. You can see here that the monthly trading volume of Uniswap actually exceeded the one from Coinbase in September 2020, which is quite a significant event, I would say, right? I mean, you find a DeFi system outpacing a centralized CeFi system. So this is quite exciting. It shows that really CeFi, DeFi and CeFi are becoming more equal. So the next building block for DeFi services are decentralized lending platforms. So in lending in DeFi and CeFi, you typically have the process of defaulting, which is quite expensive. It's typically under collateralized, so the bank will check your credit worthiness, whether you're trusted to repay your loan in a few years' time. And in DeFi, what we find is that we have so-called collateralized loans. So we can have over-collateralized, so not based on credit, and we have under-collateralized loans. So we have an entire lecture dedicated on lending, and we go much more into the details. But if you just on a high level want to understand what is possible in DeFi, it's basically by collateralizing an asset, you can lend another asset, and this increases your exposure to cryptocurrencies. You run the risk of being liquidated, and the liquidation event will cut some of your assets because the liquidator will be incentivized to perform the liquidation on your behalf. There are a variety of decentralized lending platforms such as Compound or Aave, as well as peer-to-peer collateralized debt markets. One really, really interesting innovation in lending in blockchains, which I believe does not exist in the traditional finance domain, is the concept of a flash loan. We have earlier discussed the idea of an atomic transaction. So it's a transaction where the actions within the transactions are executed entirely in sequence, or they must fail collectively, right? So the pool lends these assets within one transaction, which is great. But within this very one transaction, you can use billions of US dollar at your own free will, but you need to pay it back by the end. And if you don't pay it back, well then the last action of the transaction is void. Hence, the first and second action of the transaction, so the taking of the flash loan and the using of the flash loan, they will be invalidated as well. So it's as if, if you don't pay the flash loan back, it's as if the transaction was never granted, right? And that's such a funny concept that doesn't exist in CeFi as far as I'm aware. So keep in mind, flash loan is a transaction, is a loan that's only valid within a single transaction, not a block, a single transaction. And you can do whatever you want within that single transaction, but you must pay it back by the end of that transaction. Otherwise, it's as if the loan was never granted. So if you want to visualize it, it really looks as such. So you have a flash loan here, you take it, you go wild with the money that you just got, but you gotta have to pay it back, plus some interest, obviously, to the lending pool, so that people are incentivized to provide you those those flash loans. So quick question. What is the risk for the lender to grant a flash loan to a borrower? What do you think? Okay, maybe pause the video for a second, think about it. Okay, I'm gonna give you an answer. There's no risk. So why is there no risk? Well, because if the loan is not paid back, then it's as if the loan was never taken. So it's as if the lender never gave the money. Hence, there's no risk, right? So it's super exciting concept. So there's obviously no temporal component on it because it's a single transaction. So you can't even say the loan is granted over a minute or an hour or so. It's literally just granted within one transaction, and there's not really a temporal component that you can capture there. So you might ask, okay, but why do we need flash loans? I mean, what's the point? Well, I mean, flash loans are really good at, for example, providing assets to do arbitrage. So if you're an arbitrageur, you need a lot of capital, right? Otherwise, the arbitrage opportunities may not yield much revenue. But now, if you have flash loans, well, you can do a flash loan and an arbitrage all in one transaction, right? So we could, for example, start here by taking a flash loan of $2 million. Then we're going to exchange this $2 million of USDC to DAI on the Curve Y market. That's one market. Then we're going to go with the bought DAI. We're going to go to the Curve SUSD pool where we exchange it back to USDC. And because here the prices are different, right, on these two markets, but they have the same assets, we can make a profit of $16,000 within that single transaction by just repaying back the flash loan at the end. So that's neat, right? It's like a single transaction. We make a beautiful profit, and we even help the markets here to synchronize, which is good for the entire ecosystem. So it's a win-win. So I hope you've seen like how innovative DeFi really is, how many applications they are created and built, and in particular how innovative we can become with flash loans and intertwined DeFi protocols that go beyond, I believe, at least some of the capabilities of the traditional CeFi systems. So yeah, I hope you're still very excited, and I also hope that by the end of this lecture or this course, or maybe during this course, you will create your own DeFi applications that will revolutionize how DeFi works and how many people interact with the financial assets on DeFi.